September 12, 1947, 11:42 p.m. The Zebra Room at the rear of the Lenox Lounge, 288 Lenox Avenue. The air inside the lounge was thick enough to choke a man. A heavy suspension of cigarette smoke, stale gin, and the desperate perfume of a city trying to forget the war. Rain lashed against the Art Deco glass facade outside, but inside, the silence at the back booth was louder than the thunder. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat motionless. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't smoking. He was simply waiting. Across the table sat Detective Lieutenant Marcus, the Vulture Thorne, a man whose badge was merely a license to hunt. The stakes on the mahogany table were not chips or cash, but a life. Specifically, the life of Bumpy's younger sister Mabel. Thorne had her locked in a damp holding cell with the 28th Precinct, facing 20 years for a heroin trafficking charge that was as manufactured as a $3 bill. Thorne leaned forward, his face slick with sweat and arrogance, tapping a gold ring against the table. "Midnight Bumpy," Thorne hissed, the smell of cheap whiskey on his breath. "The transfer papers to Bedford Hills get signed at 12:01. Once she's in the system, she's gone. You hand over the 116th Street numbers bank, or your sister rots." Bumpy didn't blink. He checked his watch. 11:43 p.m. He had 17 minutes to dismantle a man's life without firing a single shot. The entire underworld of Harlem held its breath. If Bumpy folded, he was finished. If he fought and missed, his family was destroyed. But the Vulture had made a critical error. He assumed Bumpy was a gangster. He forgot Bumpy was a chess master. 3 weeks earlier, the temperature in Harlem had been rising alongside the humidity. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was not merely a crime boss, he was the unauthorized mayor of Harlem. By 1927, he had consolidated power following the chaotic vacuum left by Dutch Schultz's death and the uneasy truces with the Italian Five Families. Bumpy operated with a distinct philosophy that separated him from the street thugs of the previous decade. He was the professor. He read Nietzsche and history books. He walked with the dignity of a statesman and carried a switchblade like a scepter. His territory stretched from 110th Street to the Polo Grounds, a kingdom built on the policy racket, the numbers game. To the people of Harlem, he was a Robin Hood figure, paying rents and handing out turkeys. To the establishment, he was a problem they couldn't solve. The historical context of 1947 was volatile. Post-war New York was a city in flux. The NYPD was under immense pressure from Mayor William O'Dwyer to clean up the city's image, which usually meant cracking down on black neighborhoods while taking envelopes from the Italian mobs downtown. The racial tension was a taut wire waiting to snap. In this ecosystem, the numbers kings were the only financial institutions that would lend to black residents, making Bumpy not just a criminal, but a central pillar of the local economy. The stakes elevated drastically when the NYPD Vice Squad, sensing the shifting tides, decided to break the unspoken rule of the underworld: you do not touch the civilians, you do not touch the women, you do not touch the family. Bumpy's reputation was built on his invulnerability. He was the man who had survived the wildest shootouts and the hardest prison stints, but everyone knew his Achilles heel was his loyalty to his own blood. If the police could weaponize his family against him, the legend of Bumpy Johnson would crumble. The Italians were watching from East Harlem. The police commissioner was watching from downtown. If Bumpy showed weakness now, the sharks would circle before dawn. Detective Lieutenant Marcus Thorne was a relic of a dying breed of policemen, the Nightstick King. Thorne was a massive slab of a man, carrying 240 pounds of corruption wrapped in a wrinkled trench coat. He ran the vice squad in the 28th Precinct like a feudal lord. He didn't just accept bribes, he demanded tribute. His nickname, the Vulture, was earned 2 years prior during a raid on a speakeasy near Small's Paradise. After shooting a fleeing suspect in the back, Thorne had reportedly sat down at the bar, ordered a steak, and ate it while the body was still cooling on the floor. He was sadistic, greedy, and protected by a shield of blue steel. Thorne wanted what every corrupt cop in 1947 wanted: a retirement fund. He had accrued massive gambling debts with the Genovese crime family specifically, a sum rumored to be over $15,000, equivalent to nearly $200,000 today. The Italians were losing patience. They'd given Thorne an ultimatum: get the money or get fitted for a cement overcoat. This desperation made Thorne exceptionally dangerous. He needed a takeover, not just a payout. He targeted Bumpy Johnson because Bumpy was the biggest whale in the ocean. Thorne knew he couldn't beat Bumpy in the streets, so he attacked the flank. He planted 2 kilos of heroin in the back of Mabel's dress shop on 125th Street. He dragged her out in handcuffs in front of her neighbors at 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. The threat was explicit and brutal. Thorne sent a messenger to the Apollo Theater where Bumpy was meeting an associate. The message was 3 words written on a napkin: Lenox Lounge, midnight. Thorne held all the cards, the evidence, the judge, and the prisoner. He had the power of the state of New York behind him. He believed he was the hunter trapping a wounded animal. He didn't realize he had just walked into a cage with a tiger. The setup was designed to humiliate. Thorne chose the Lenox Lounge because it was Bumpy's living room. To force a surrender in Bumpy's own headquarters was the ultimate power move. Thorne had 4 uniformed officers waiting outside in a squad car and 2 plainclothes detectives sitting at the bar, drinking rye whiskey and watching the mirror. The trap seemed airtight. Inside the zebra room, the sensory overload was intense. The walls, padded with zebra print leather, absorbed the low hum of the conversation from the front room. The lighting was dim, amber sconces casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the tin ceiling. The air smelled of expensive cigars and fear. On the table sat a glass of water for Bumpy and a double bourbon for Thorne. The condensation on Bumpy's glass had pooled at the base, the only thing moving on his side of the table. 11:47 p.m. Thorne unbuttoned his jacket, revealing the snub-nosed .38 Detective Special holstered on his hip. He took a heavy swig of bourbon. The ice cubes clinked against the glass's sharp, jarring sound in the quiet booth. "You're stalling, Johnson," Thorne grunted, wiping his mouth with the back of a hairy hand. "I know you have the deed to the 16th Street spot. Sign it over. My guys drop the charges. Mabel walks out the back door of the precinct tonight." 11:51 p.m. Bumpy slowly picked up a silver case. He extracted a cigarette, tapped it twice on the table, and lit it. The flare of the lighter illuminated his face stone cold, impassive, eyes like black marble. He exhaled a stream of blue smoke that drifted toward Thorne. "You're a brave man, Marcus," Bumpy said softly. His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the distant jazz trumpet playing in the front room. "Stupid, but brave." Thorne slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "Don't psychoanalyze me, you Harlem trash. I own you right now. I have the judge in my pocket. I have the evidence tag. You think you're untouchable? You're a number in a ledger to me." 11:55 p.m. The tension in the room tightened like a noose. The bartender, a man named Silas who had seen 3 men die in this room over the years, stopped wiping glasses. He moved to the far end of the bar. The music seemed to stop. The rain hammered harder against the glass. Thorne checked his watch again. 5 minutes, then I call the station. Once I make that call, she's processed. Then she goes upstate. You know what happens to a woman like her in a place like Bedford Hills. 11:58 p.m. Thorne pulled a fountain pen from his pocket and threw it onto the document. It rolled across the mahogany and hit Bumpy's hand. "Sign," Thorne commanded. The word hung in the air. Bumpy looked at the pen. Then he looked at Thorne. He didn't pick up the pen. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. The 2 plainclothes cops at the bar tensed, hands drifting toward their waistbands. Thorne's eyes widened slightly, but Bumpy didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a single standard manila envelope. It was thin, unremarkable. He slid it across the table. "Read," Bumpy whispered. 11:59 p.m. The room held its breath. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the tearing of paper as Thorne opened the envelope. What Detective Thorne didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson never played a game he hadn't already won before he sat down. While Thorne was busy planning drugs and bullying shopkeepers, Bumpy had activated his most potent weapon, his intelligence network. 3 days prior, Bumpy had contacted a cleaning lady named Etta. Etta didn't work for Bumpy. She worked for the NYPD. Specifically, she cleaned the captain's office at the 28th Precinct. Bumpy had paid for Etta's grandson's eye surgery 2 years ago. Etta owed him. Bumpy knew Thorne was corrupt, but corruption wasn't enough to destroy a cop in 1947. You needed to prove disloyalty. Thorne pulled a single photograph and a carbon copy of a ledger sheet from the envelope. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like his blood had evaporated. His hand began to shake violently. The photograph didn't show Thorne taking money. It showed Thorne meeting with a man named Sal the Butcher Garofalo, a rival mobster who was currently at war with the very police captain Thorne worked for. But the ledger sheet was the kill shot. It was a copy of Thorne's private bookkeeping, which Bumpy's men had liberated from a floor safe in Thorne's mistress's apartment in the Bronx while Thorne was busy arresting Mabel. The ledger detailed not the bribes Thorne took, but the bribes he stole from his own precinct captain. Thorne had been skimming 40% dollars off the top of the kickbacks meant for his superiors. In the NYPD, taking bribes was standard operating procedure. Stealing from your boss was a death sentence. Bumpy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "That copy is for you," Bumpy said. "The original is currently in an envelope on your captain's desk, along with the photos. His shift starts at 8 hours. You have exactly 8 hours to disappear from this city, Marcus. If the captain finds you, you're dead. If the Italians find out you used their money to pay off the captain you were stealing from, well." Bumpy picked up the fountain pen Thorne had thrown at him. He didn't sign the deed. He snapped the pen in half. Ink bled onto the table like black blood. "You came for my kingdom," Bumpy said, delivering the final blow. "But kings don't lose to men who can't see 3 moves ahead. The call to release my sister has already been made by your captain. He thinks you made the mistake." The transformation of Marcus Thorne was instantaneous and pathetic. The swaggering Vulture dissolved into a trembling, terrified fat man. He looked at the clock, 12:02 a.m. He looked at the envelope. He looked at Bumpy. Thorne didn't say a word. He couldn't. His throat had constricted with pure panic. He shoved the papers into his coat pocket, knocking over his bourbon glass in the process. The amber liquid spilled across the table, dripping onto the floor. Thorne scrambled out of the booth, nearly tripping over his own feet. He didn't signal his plainclothes men. He didn't look back. He ran out of the Lenox Lounge into the rainy Harlem night as if the devil himself was snapping at his heels. At 2:15 a.m., the phone behind the bar rang. Silas picked it up, listened for a moment, and nodded to Bumpy. "She's out, boss. Cab is bringing her home now." The ripple effect was immediate. By the next morning, the word on the street wasn't that Bumpy had killed a cop. It was that Bumpy had erased one. Thorne didn't just resign, he evaporated. He never returned to the precinct to clear his locker. Rumors swirled that he was seen boarding a bus to Ohio or perhaps Florida. He was never seen in New York City again. The 28th precinct, realizing that Bumpy had deep hooks into their internal operations, backed off. The harassment of the numbers runners ceased for 6 months. The captain, having received his lost money anonymously, courtesy of Bumpy, to ensure the captain remained placated, decided that Ellsworth Johnson was a necessary evil best left alone. Bumpy stood up, buttoned his coat, and placed a $100 bill on the table for Silas. He walked out of the Lenox Lounge into the rain, his legend not just intact, but cemented in iron. This confrontation at the Lenox Lounge became a cornerstone of the Bumpy Johnson mythology. It mattered because it redefined the power dynamic between Harlem and the law. In an era where a black man could be killed for looking at a badge the wrong way, Bumpy Johnson had forced a high-ranking white detective to flee the city in terror without lifting a finger. It revealed the core of Bumpy's genius. Information is more lethal than ammunition. While other gangsters of his era, like Dutch Schultz or Mad Dog Cole, relied on brute force and body counts, Bumpy operated like a grandmaster. He understood that everyone, even the law, had a master they feared. He didn't fight the man, he fought the man's leverage. The universal lesson from that rainy night to read, 2047 remains timeless. Real power isn't about who has the biggest gun, it's about who knows the secrets. Bumpy taught the underworld that violence is what you use when you run out of ideas. If this story showed you why Bumpy Johnson was truly the godfather of Harlem, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you respect the code of silence, and tell me in the comments, would you have let Thorne run or would you have finished him? Next week, we're diving into the time Lucky Luciano tried to take over 125th Street and why he failed.